All right, thank you and welcome everybody to our lunchtime Vermont vegetable and berry growers webinar. Today, we're really excited to have Cheryl Sullivan from UVM Extension and Anna Wallingford from UNH Extension, both entomologists, and here to share high tunnel pest information, both old and new. So I would ask everybody to hold questions as you can or post them in chat and I'll moderate that. Each of them is going to present for about 25 minutes and we'll have some time at the end of the webinar to have questions and conversation. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Cheryl. Thanks so much for coming to both of you.
Absolutely. Excited to be here. All right. So first, I just wanted to mention an opportunity that we're offering for new high tunnel growers. And by new, we mean in production for less than 5 years. So UVM and UNH receive funding from Northeast SARE to offer a range of training opportunities for newish growers and to develop resources on best management approaches for pest diseases and soil fertility. So participating growers starting this spring will receive one-on-one training in the form of periodic site visits and online sessions with members from the tunnel team. And you'll also get some access to an info toolkit and more. So please send me an email if you want to be a part of this, and please pass that on to fellow growers. Okay, so high tunnels are great to extend the growing season by adding protection from environmental conditions. Unfortunately, as much as the plants like to protection, arthropod pests do too. So restricted air movements as the plant canopy thickens can often result in pockets of high temperature and humidity, and pests really like that. So this causes hot spots where these localized infestations can get out of control quite quickly if not detected early. So we manage pests using integrated pest management, or IPM, and that's just a decision-making process that takes account in like your own personal economics and action thresholds, because that's when you want to manage your pests when the populations exceed those. So this integrated approach focuses on best practices like cultural controls, biocontrol agents, and biorational pesticides to prevent these pests from causing damage. So really, you only use the harsh chemical pesticides only as a last resort. So how do we pick a viable management strategy? So other than talking to your university extension networks, biocontrol supplier, or pesticide reps, you want to look at the New England Vegetable Management Guide. And it's updated regularly, offered for free on the web or a hard copy for a fee. But it's a great summary of pesticides and biocontrols. So please check out the products listed in those tables. There's lots of products out there, but if you choose to use pesticides, I have to say, please read the label. And we can't emphasize that enough, because oftentimes with these softer chemistries or biopesticides, they need to be reapplied at certain intervals to manage pests, among other important details you find on the label. So also get certified if you're applying products with ag use labels and supervising employees, because just because these products are labeled as organic, it doesn't mean that they're safe. So how do you know when it's time to resort to a pesticide and not do something like release biocontrol? It's when your plants have a spider mite spillover or the aphid apocalypse. And when plants reach that point, it's too late to use natural enemies, because they're going to have a hard time catching up to that. So hopefully this doesn't happen, because this situation can be prevented. So before these plants get to the mega infested stage, there's a whole lot of strategies that you can use to reduce the chances of that happening and to make the environment less suitable for pest establishment. I'm not going to cover all these, but just for today's purposes, some of these include scouting and monitoring, looking at incoming plant material, because, you know, it's your first line of defense, start clean to stay clean. And biocontrols can be used preventatively early on in the season, not after the aphid apocalypse happens. Spot spraying or roguing infested plants or areas tends to work. Screening and row covers to exclude pests, and managing weeds is a big one, because a lot of pests like to hang out on weeds both inside and at the outer edge of the tunnels. And of course, removing debris that otherwise might be infested, cropping cycle to cropping cycle, and you want to really try to avoid rotating crops into already infested tunnels. Okay, so one of the most effective prevention strategies is scouting, because you want to find the problems before they become a problem and as early as possible. So from this information, you can determine how many plants are infested and at what magnitude. And this is really critical because it helps you gauge the rates that pesticides and biocontrol agents should be applied. So after that, you can then evaluate the efficacy of these treatments over time. So scouting really should combine use of sticky cards with plant inspections because sticky cards only capture winged adult insects. And plants should be inspected either by tapping them onto like a laminated piece of paper or visually by turning over leaves and using a hand lens to see the small pests that usually are on the leaf undersides. So different parts of the plant should be inspected because certain pests hide within different plant parts. So when these issues are found, it's really good to like mark the area with flagging because there you can actually target that spot with a treatment, and then you can evaluate how it worked over time. So one of the most important tasks along with scouting is to record the observations for future reference. And a lot of times pest management will fail because the wrong intervention rate was applied to the crop square footage or to the level of pest pressure that is present. Or things like interventions were applied at the wrong time during the pest life cycle. And all these things can be prevented by scouting and knowing a little bit about the pests. Okay, so this leads me into getting to know your friends from your foes, because you want to be able to intervene at that right pest stage in their life cycle. So you want to know what the life stages look like and what time of year they occur and thrive in. So a lot of natural enemies tend to be predatory in either adult or immature stages, and sometimes both. So it's good to know what those look like and how they function so they're not mistaken for pests, because some of the immatures of these predators can look a lot like pests. Okay, so let's talk about some pests. Mites. So there's three of concern. It's two-spotted spider mite, broad mite, and tomato russet mite. And two-spotted spider mites, as you can see on the upper right-hand slide, has two dark spots. And like the name suggests, they're found on leaf undersides. And particularly they like eggplants, cucumber, and tomato. So it's really good to remove weeds and tunnels if they're fallowed over winter, because they like to overwinter in debris along tunnel edges and in structures. And they also turn red during the short days of winter. And a lot of these infestations can start along edges or near places where they overwintered. So we worked with a grower who had several years worth of issues with spider mites on tomatoes in the same place in the tunnels. And it took some releases of biocontrols along the interior edges of the tunnel in the spring just to get at those overwintering mites. And we did a crop rotation and it really seemed to solve the problem. And they've been spider mite free ever since. So little tweaks like that can really make a big difference. So broad mites, they're another one. They've been showing up more the past several years. And I tend to see these a lot in locations where transplants have been obtained from places that were also producing greenhouse ornamentals. And these mites can dramatically affect pepper, eggplants, and tomatoes. Unfortunately, it's often too late to do much about them once severe damage appears. And it's really best to pull out any of those infested plants, particularly when they're fruiting. And these mites can move along or around in the tunnel on other flying pests. They actually hitchhike on things like winged aphids and whiteflies. And these are really, really tiny, and you can only see them microscopically. And their eggs are really, really distinct, and they have this mottled appearance. So also tomato russet mites, they're also microscopic, and they can occasionally be a problem, but that's more so in the south. But it's another reason to remove debris because they can persist on other solanaceous crops because they use them as alternative hosts. So here's a little bit about their damage. So tomato russet mite damage, as the name suggests, they do russeting, and that's like a bronzing kind of distortion color or coloration on fruits and stems. And they do foliar distortion and curling, and they have this rust colored powder buildup, and that's actually mite buildup. Kind of gross. Okay, broad mites. With broad mites, you really see that foliar distortion and curling. And here you can see that on pepper, really, really, really distorted. And they also can cause some russeting and some deformities, some fruit deformities and splitting. And they also do some leaf curling and stunting as well. Okay, so spider mite damage, as the name suggests, they're spider mites, so they make webs, lots and lots and lots of webs. as you can see in this picture. I mean, that's a telltale sign. And also that's really characteristic of spider mites is a yellow stippling that's visiting on the leaf surfaces. And they can also cause these yellow flecking on the fruits, as you can see on those tomatoes. And you can also see the speckling on those cucumbers in the upper right-hand picture. So a way to monitor spider mites is the use of bush beans. And these work really well when young plants are planted along the edge of tunnels that are prone to infestations. And they're great scouting tools because the damage shows up easily on their smooth leaves. And these are cheap and easy to grow, and they grow fast, and they can be replaced readily throughout the season. And they're really the most effective when they're younger and they have like more luscious foliage for the mites to eat. Okay, so some of the natural enemies for them, they can be managed really well with biocontrols before the infestations get to damaging levels. And mainly they're a lot of species of predatory mites that attack them. So a few of these also eat pollen in the absence of their prey. And you can buy these in hanging slow release sachets, which allows them to persist for a longer period of time in the crops. So all these mites have different ranges of humidities and temperatures in which they do best. And not all of them play nice together. So it's really good to consult a biocontrol supplier on their use. And there's also a predatory midge. It's a fly, and its larva, which is a maggot, eats mites and adults, and they don't eat adults. They eat mites in the larval stage, and adults feed on nectars, and they're actually naturally occurring, and you can purchase them commercially. Next up are thrips, and thrips are really concerning because of their ability to vector viruses like tomato spotted wilt virus. So here in the north, western flower thrips and onion thrips are very common. Both of these species lay eggs within plant tissues, and they usually pupate in the soil. So the ground portion of their life stage is often overlooked for management. So you really need to account for the thrips that may be emerging from the soil, even if you don't see them on the foliage. So there's a lot of different immature stages of thrips larvae that vary in yellow color. And you can find these often on the undersides of leaves. So here's some examples of the damage. So the characteristic thrips damage is a bunch of silver patches on the surfaces of the leaf. And they have a lot of black dots in the center, which is their frass or poop. And they can also, in severe infestations, cause distortion and yellowing and flecking of the fruits. And, virus symptoms have those like striation looking sort of mottled appearance on the fruits. All right, a little bit about natural enemies. There's a lot of options ranging from predatory beetles and bugs to mites. But these, again, they need to be combined to get both the soil and foliar dwelling stages of thrips. So the predatory bug aureus, this is actually naturally occurring, and you can buy it commercially, but it's predatory in both the adult and the immature stages. And you can use marigolds to trap thrips in crops, particularly when things aren't in bloom and early in the season when plants are smaller. So the thrips are actually attracted there, and you can tap them out over a laminated piece of paper to monitor for them. And some growers will hang mite sachets onto them to manage any thrips that are attracted there. And they'll even use a sticky card on them just for added, scouting benefits. So if infestations get too high on these marigolds, you just bag them up with their little friends and just throw them away in the trash. Okay, next up is whiteflies. And the biggest threat here in the Northeast is greenhouse whitefly, often on tomatoes. And the silverleaf whitefly is more associated with greenhouse ornamentals. Often if you find the silverleaf whitefly, it's because they came in on infested stock, if the transplants were, say, in greenhouses near ornamentals. And both these whiteflies can vector viruses, but they can also be suppressed really effectively using parasitic wasps. So most tunnel growers use incarcia, and they come in this hanging tag form. You can see that in kind of the picture in the middle of the slide on the right. And you just hang them on the plants. And you can tell that the wasps are working because when the wasp parasitizes an immature greenhouse whitefly or a nymph, the nymphs will turn a black color. So it's really hard to tell whitefly adults apart, but you can look at their nymphs to tell them apart. And greenhouse whitefly nymphs, they have really, really long hairs. And you can kind of see that one picture in the center, and they're kind of like cake shape and little hairy scales that you find on the undersides of leaves. Okay, so a little bit about their damage. These are some common signs that you have white flies, and usually it's sooty mold on leaves, and that's from honeydew infestations, or some of their poop, and it, sooty mold grows on that when you get really high infestations. And you get this leaf curling and yellowing. A lot of times that can happen with high numbers of feeding or from viruses. And oftentimes you can get irregular ripening of fruit, and of course some yellowing on the leaves. And of course you can see them flying around in little white clouds if you disturb the plant. So that's a dead giveaway too. Okay, so aphids, they are the #1 pest in high tunnel crops in the Northeast. They're very challenging to manage, and they're one of those things that just won't go away. So please just don't rotate crops in and not manage the existing aphid image or issue, because they're just hard to get rid of. And if you have them in there, and if you put new crops in, they're just going to jump off the old crops onto the new one unless you do something, because they can reproduce really, really fast. They give live birth, and they're parthenogenic, so they give birth to little clones. So the live birth just makes them completely explode. So they have this really complicated life cycle with winged form and non-winged forms. And yeah, they have a really high reproductive rate. So also weeding is really important. So remove weeds and debris, especially if you're fallowing a tunnel over winter, because I've seen aphids on one little tiny weed sitting in the middle of a tunnel in the dead of winter, and they're just waiting for new crops to be planted. So definitely why weeding is important. Okay, some of the common damage signs of aphids are distorted leaves, like shown here on these peppers. Lots of distortion, like that's usually a dead giveaway right at the tips. And of course, there's a honeydew or aphid poop, and that can be dripping from the plants. It's often really, really shiny. And these cast skins, and these are the molted exoskeletons as the aphids grow, and they shed those kind of just like the way a snake sheds its skin. And many times these are mistaken for whiteflies to those who are new to pest ID, because they do kind of fly away and they kind of look like a little whitefly and they flutter around in the air. But they're not, they're aphid cast skins. So that's why it's good to have your trusty hand lens to look at them really closely, just to make sure. And finally, you can also get sooty mold that grows on the honeydew, kind of the way the damage from the whiteflies. Same sort of idea. And you can also see that there's more cast skins here in these pictures as well with the sooty mold. I just want to mention that the slides that I just showed were very severe infestations of aphids. So biocontrol would not fix those aphid infestations, particularly when those crops are that far gone. So really the only thing that would have solved these problems are pesticide sprays or the compost heap. Okay, so on tomatoes, the aphid of concern is potato aphid with foxglove a second. And if growing winter greens, you'll likely see green peach or foxglove, but there's other aphid species that can also be found on them just the same. But these are kind of the big 4 usual suspects. So when transitioning crops over, these can move from greens to like overwinter greens to tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants in the summer. And like green peach aphid, the infestations can look really scary on tomatoes. But pruning the lower leaves and using biocontrols early can seem to allow green peach aphids to kind of fizzle out over time. But that's not really the case with foxglove or potato aphid, though it does persist and kind of devastate a tomato crop if they're left unmanaged. So you should really check your plants when buying them in before planting them in a tunnel, because oftentimes I'll see foxglove aphids hitching rides when plants are passed along to new locations. And they're also a cooler season aphid, and they have the ability to overwinter more effectively than others. So it's really good to know what aphid species are infesting the crops, because some biocontrol agents only attack certain ones. So they're challenging to tell apart, and you really can't base it off color because they occur in several shades, and head color and head shape is kind of subjective. So, but for the most part, it's likely that if there's large green or red aphids in the middle of summer on tomato, it's likely potato aphid. And foxglove aphids, they're really distinct because they have two dark spots at the base of their cornicles, and you can see those with the hand lens, and you can see that the foxglove is the one on the top left of the screen. And green peach aphid like to infest eggplants, greens, and peppers, and melon aphids really enjoy cucumbers. So when in doubt, if you get aphids, send them to your pest diagnostic clinic for an ID. Okay, so there's a lot of parasitic wasps that attack aphid. They're specialists, meaning they only attack certain aphids, hence why the ID is important. And a lot of these are actually naturally occurring too. So parasitized aphids turn into mummies, which are brown and black in color, depending on what parasitized it. You can see those two pictures of the mummies on the slide. And within those, the wasp is pupating inside after the larva consume the aphid insides. So that's good. You see mummies, that means there's wasps. Okay, there's also several different predators that are both naturally occurring and purchased that attack aphids. So in winter on greens, when aphids can be the worst, predators are really limited to lady beetles. And however, most of these are wild caught, and supply has been really low because they come from the mountains of California, which are affected by drought and fires. So get out there and find those aphids in the fall, because if they're there in the fall on greens, they're going to be there in spring waiting to explode on greens, and if you're going to transition over. So the problem with the lady beetles and lacewing larvae, there's another predator, is that they actually need aphid infestations to stick around. So unlike wasps that can be released as a prophylactic, these little predators shouldn't be unless you have a hot spot. So in summer, Aphidoletes, that's a midge that has predatory larvae, that's used a lot in high tunnels because it attacks a wide range of aphid species. So it doesn't really matter what species they are. And again, it's a fly and the larvae are predatory. All right, and another one who's a fly whose larvae are predatory are hover or syrphid flies. And these mimic bees to scare off predators, but they're also really important pollinators. And these are wild and they can come in to provide free biocontrol. They're actually commercially available, or one species commercially available in Canada, but unfortunately, we're not allowed to use it here in the United States. Okay, so alyssum is often used as a habitat planting to attract syrphids for aphid management in a whole variety of cropping systems. And we tested some habitat plants in high tunnels, and we found indeed that alyssum was the most attractive of the other plants that we tested. And we found that pirate bugs like Aureus that I mentioned earlier was observed on them, but also syrphid flies were attracted a lot. So alyssum persists a lot throughout the season because it's tolerant for a wide range of temperature and climate conditions. And it's really good because they provide floral resources to both wild and commercially purchased agents. Okay, so real quickly, hornworms, you grow tomatoes, you might have seen hornworms. They really like to defoliate plants. There's two types, the tomato hornworm that has V-shaped stripes on its body and a black horn on its rear. And then we see this one later on in the summer, but it really is a tobacco hornworm we see most frequently. This one has diagonal stripes and a red horn, and they might overwinter in tunnels under the soil debris as pupa. So you might see them showing up a little bit earlier on than like later in, mid to late summer. So it's usually their frass or poop on foliage is first noticed because the caterpillars are well camouflaged. And the picture on the bottom of the screen, it looks like a lot of grains of rice. That is from a naturally occurring parasitic wasp called Cotesia that targets the caterpillars. So the wasps will lay eggs within, and after the larvae hatch, they emerge to pupate on the hornworm. So that's pretty cool to see. It's really fun to see those. So then also some well-timed sprays of Bt bacteria often take care of hornworms otherwise. So just a few other larger pests that are common are flea beetles, cucumber beetles, and Colorado potato beetles. Ones that like to defoliate and make big holes in your plants. And these are managed using various pesticides, but also exclusion screens and floating roll covers can work. And Anna is going to cover worms and such very shortly. So first, before I hand it over to Anna, here's some additional resources about what was just covered to check out. And we'll get this PDF posted later on, so don't fret if you missed the smaller details that were on the slides. So you'll be able to have the links to these. Okay, thanks again. And now I'll turn it over to Anna.
Thank you, Cheryl. That was a really nice introduction to some of the stuff I'm going to do, because I'm going to get really specific about winter pests and some things that we're working on here specific to two of our biggest problems that we're seeing right now in tunnels. So just a quick research update, just a little taste on some stuff that we're doing with aphid biocontrol and tunnel spinach, and then what we know about winter cutworm, as it were, which I'm going to warn you, it's not very much, but here we go. And this is my email address. I'll make sure that you all have it if you want it. Before I forget, I want to acknowledge my funding sources as well as some of the folks who are contributing to this. I will mention that I and Becky Seidman here at UNH are part of a big high tunnel biocontrol project that's going on right now. I'm going to make sure that you all have a link to our Instagram page and you can give it a follow. But we are just getting started on this project. And this is a big, huge project full of other entomologists, crop production specialists, and economists who are going to be looking at using biocontrol in tunnels year round and doing some economic analysis to say, is it worth it to release it? Like depending on what's coming in naturally, doing some balancing. But right now we are just wrapping up our very first winter. So that's what I wanted to talk about a little bit. I've been really interested in biocontrol in early spring and maybe even late winter, because it's a very unusual environment, right? You have really low UV, you have some freezing temperatures at night, you'll have rapid changes in temperature during the day. We're getting mixed results when it comes to entomopathogens. In general, these Bavaria products, I wouldn't recommend for use outside because they're so sensitive to desiccation and UV, but inside a tunnel, why not? We have found that spray coverage is going to be the barrier to that because these products need to be germinating on these insect bodies. So mixed results. Some of the predatory flies and parasitic wasps that Cheryl mentioned maybe aren't the best candidates in here because you really need ideal conditions for them to, start a family essentially and lay their offspring in order to provide that service. Lady beetles, they're cheap, they're conspicuous, they're really resilient in cold temperatures, but obviously because they're wild harvested, this is potentially problematic. Also, there's some kind of gray area as far as their status when they come to you. Like, are they in a diapause state? Are they really that hungry? Are they really doing their jobs? We're really interested in lacewing larvae. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about lacewing larvae. My concern as far as a barrier in this environment is desiccation. They're little tiny insects. They're going to have a hard time surviving in that environment potentially, and even condensation can be a problem. So two ends of the two extremes, they could be drowning themselves in condensation. But lab reared insects are readily available year round and they're relatively affordable depending on who you're talking to. So here's an example of the tunnel conditions we're talking about. Typically several hours of what we would consider to be optimal temperatures for growth, for aphid growth, as well as predatory hunting. And then you have freezing temps at night. So it's all about a matter of like, is it a sunny day? You're going to have warmer temps in there if it's a sunny day versus an overcast day. And then when the sun is gone at night, you have those things dipping down. So just to acknowledge this is in Celsius. So think about this. Everything above 30 is going to be way too hot for anything. We're in the just right zone around 20 degrees. That's like 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Things start slowing down once you get around 5 degrees Celsius. Freezing, so 0 degrees, it's not great, but it's not deadly, right? So this is something where 0 degrees will knock out an insect. They'll go into a chill coma and they'll wake back up again as soon as temperatures warm up. And now that you get down here, too cold for predators. So this was that day we had that one really, really cold night. We had some really freezing temperatures and that would probably kill just about any climbing insect. All right. So we would like to know how well these predators perform after they've been knocked out. So we prepare these insects for a bioassay, hold them without food to make sure they're nice and hungry when we're ready to bioassay them. Our control was room temperature. We have an ice treatment. They were held on ice at 0 degrees for 24 hours. Then we had a freezer temperature, which is like about 24 hours, and then like a really acute treatment, which is about -10 to -20, depending on how cold our freezer was when we were doing it. So chill coma recovery time is something that we use to say, how serious was that? Like, how badly were their lights knocked out? So, but I don't have good video for lacewings, but you can see that's a nice video of the lady beetle performing its assay. We kind of take how long does it take for this insect to climb out and start foraging? So for lacewings, we found our controls. It took them 3 to 5 minutes to want to leave. The ice and freezer temperatures weren't any different, but you could definitely see like they had their lights knocked out before this assay. And then so we give them a bunch of aphids to eat, come back 24 hours later and find that they're eating just as many aphids as the ones that didn't have that exposure. So that's good news. So these are the kinds of experiments that we are working on. I don't have a lot of really good conclusions yet, but I will make a comment about some of these products. You get recommendations for releasing these predators during the summertime. So you'll see release at dusk, irrigate before release. I would ignore those for the wintertime because release at dusk is meant to avoid hot and dry summer conditions. I would just say avoid releasing before a hard freeze. Just look at the weather. A sunny day will provide the longest period of those optimal temperatures for foraging. And that irrigate before release is like to make sure that they have enough to drink, but definitely prioritize your optimal conditions during the wintertime. You know what's best there. All right, so I'm going to take a quick breather to ask anybody who's moderating if there's any pertinent questions, but go ahead and type into the chat, like, what are you seeing right now? I would love to get some feedback. Just type into the chat what you're seeing. Are you seeing success or failures using these? What products would you like us to put through this ringer, as it were? And I'm going to put that Instagram in there. Okay, I'll definitely take a look at those comments and maybe respond. Cheryl, did you have a question?
Oh, I was looking. I looked at the chat because you mentioned if there was anything, but there was a very related comment about the ladybug issue and availability and the issues with sustainable harvesting and so on and so forth. So any comments to that?
I would never criticize anybody for using any kind of tool, right? But if you go online and just like go on Amazon and buy lady beetles, chances are pretty good that those lady beetles were wild harvested from California. A lot of the times folks will rear them or just kind of hold them, kind of finish them on diet, and that's why they're readily available. But it's really hard to tell. It's really, really hard to distinguish between ones that are lab reared and ones that are wild harvested. I mean, my best guess is that if they're super cheap, right? So if you're paying like, $10 for 5,000 beetles, chances are pretty good that those are wild harvested and not lab reared. Do you think that? What do you think, Cheryl?
It's the same, and it's a personal preference issue. I know growers that refuse to use them for that reason, and for fear of bringing pathogens and so forth and distributing them across the United States, so on and so forth. But what other options are there? There's like what we really need is a good lady beetle here in the Northeast that's adapted to the region that we could employ to do this work. So.
And actually, this is kind of coming up soon, is I'm working with a couple people on training programs to rear your own pink lady beetle. Mm-hmm. So the important thing is that the copyright on the diet that commercial rearers had used before, it's up. It is public knowledge now. So we're going to start putting together some workshops on how you might be able to rear your own pink lady beetles. Part of that project is also going to be able to figure out whether or not it's worth people's time and effort to do their own rearing projects. But depending on what your operation's like, that might be an attractive thing. Becky, did you want to weigh in?
No, that's great. There's just a few more questions and comments. I don't know if you want them now or if you want to move ahead.
I think we have. Is anything critical? Because I'm just going to talk about winter cutworm and then.
Yep. Yeah, go for it.
Cool.
Thanks.
All right. So I will say this is an emerging situation. We did have a webinar a couple, maybe it was 2 years ago. So if you would like to type that bit.ly link into your web browser, it'll link you to a recording of this cutworm webinar. Dan Gilrain gave us a synopsis of what we know about this new species, winter cutworm. We were just kind of figuring out what was going on, but we were hearing a lot of things and trying to figure out what problem was actually happening. Essentially, people were seeing a lot of defoliation, like you're seeing here, like a lot of Swiss cheese and their Swiss chard. So during that webinar, we had a poll and asking people what they think their problem was, and we're seeing that largely the problem was cool season greens, which made us think that this was going to be a new problem and kind of different than what we would think is a usual cutworm problem. I'm going to just talk a little bit just to distinguish the different types of damage we might be talking about. So classic cutworm, the spring damage, the species of cutworm that are lying in wait in the soil during the day, and then at night they come out and they are just feeding at the soil surface, doing that cutworm feeding damage. So you're losing transplants. One cutworm could be going down that row of spring transplants and doing the problem. Summer damage, this is caterpillars that are climbing up into the fruit and doing damage. This right here is a yellow striped armyworm. I don't recognize that other one. That might be variegated. And then there's this new one, which is like way later in the season than you would ever expect. I think a lot of people were attributing this to yellow striped armyworm because it was climbing up into the canopy and causing damage. People were going out at night with headlamps to scout. This photo is thanks to Becky Seidman, who had a cutworm infestation. And if you can see, it's kind of dangling right there. That is a winter cutworm. So she was able to actually go out at night and collect the culprit and get a proper identification. So originally we're thinking, okay, like what are these species that we are usual suspects that would be occurring late in the season? And these are species that overwinter as larvae. So things that you would expect to see in a greens crop in like September, October, November. Black cutworm and variegated cutworm are probably the most common species, but they are more likely to be feeding at the ground level and not climbing up to do that marginal or that wholly feeding. A couple notes on identification. Black cutworm, it's kind of like hard to distinguish. It's kind of just black. But these little dots on its side tend to be a little shiny, like kind of described like patent leather appearance. So if you take a look at that, the variegated has these kind of diamond patterns along its back. Also, these 4 yellow dots tend to be a really nice way to distinguish that from other species. And here's our new guide. This is the winter cutworm, Noctua pronuba. The adult is called large yellow underwing moth. This is a really common species in Europe, and it's relatively new here in North America. And the caterpillars are crazy cold tolerant. We got lots and lots of reports this January of mass migrations of these caterpillars crawling across snow. It's really alarming. Here's another slide on distinguishing winter cutworm from another usual suspect. So you kind of have a weak yellow line, which might be mistaken for that yellow striped, but the difference is like the head capsule on winter cutworm is brown, where the yellow striped armyworm will have a black head capsule. Also, this weird thing is that sometimes they'll come out green. Yellow striped armyworm will stay the same color, and they even have this like little black dot. This is on its butt end. It looks like an eyeball, and that species will have that black dot on it no matter what age the caterpillar is. Another thing is that the color variation can vary widely, anywhere from bright green to pink to brown, whatever. The dead giveaway for this is this kind of what I would call like a dotted line across the back, right? So you see that everywhere. But essentially, if you have a cutworm in December, it's going to be a winter cutworm. There's no way that you're going to have any of these other species actively feeding on crops in December, January, things like that. So a couple points about its life cycle. Know that these moths are flying during the summertime, so June through September, and then they'll be laying eggs. So the larvae that you see in your tunnels this time of year are a result of moths laying eggs during July through September. There is some anecdotal evidence that larvae are crawling into the tunnels from other places. I don't think it's a matter of either or. It's probably a combination of the two, depending on what's around those tunnels. But we are just learning about this species and its relationship to winter tunnels. This is what the eggs look like. They're laid in these big egg masses. This photo is from Dan Gilrain, and you'll see like these peaks represent a couple different years, but you'll see these little tiny peaks. So the takeaway from here is that we think there's 1 or 2 flight periods, but this might explain why we're seeing such variation in the size of the caterpillars. So if you have multiple flight periods during the year, you might have big and large caterpillars in December. So that might explain some of the things that you all are seeing. In terms of chemical control, again, we don't have any hard evidence for any of the products that we have that are, whether or not they're effective on this species entirely, but I'm going to make a bold statement and assume that any product that's effective on caterpillars will have some efficacy on this species. So go to your guides, go and kind of cross-reference your arsenal. If it's registered for use on caterpillars, if it's registered for use on greenhouses, that should give you something, right? There is some potential for baits. There's a lot of products that are registered for use in plant systems that contain spinosad. So, you know, take a look at that. There's some okay evidence that would be worth your while. Not really sure if it's as good as a foliar application. Just some quick and dirty bait efficacy work that we've been doing over this winter with hand collected caterpillars. We fed a bunch of caterpillars different levels of spinosad, just knowing that a lot of those baits contain really, really small amounts of spinosad, and we're seeing efficacy on really small amounts of spinosad. So that's good news. Stay tuned. This is still quick and dirty at this point. BT, we wanted to know if that is an option for people, and we're seeing the same things we usually see with BT, that, you know, if that caterpillar eats BT, it'll get sick and die, but it does take a little time. It's slow to kill. And another comment is that it's slow to kill, but it is pretty quick to stop feeding. So if you see the petri dishes in the bottom, that's our controls, our nice healthy caterpillars eating their way through their lettuce, and the ones on top have consumed some BT, so they've got tummy aches and they're not interested in that material. Entomopathogenic nematodes are certainly super attractive here, because that caterpillar would be definitely hanging out where they are if you did a soil application. There's no reason not to think that any EPN strain wouldn't be effective as long as the EPN gets to the cutworm. So soil moisture is critical. Soil temperature is going to be critical. They really can't move through the soil at temperatures lower than 55 degrees. So I think the take home here is it's probably not appropriate for wintertime applications, right? So if you realize you have a problem in December, it's probably too late to do anything. But if you can preempt that, it might be worthwhile. Again, research is ongoing. This is a collaboration that we're doing with Oregon State, where they have problems with grass seed productions. That's really interesting. So that's all I have. I would happy to take questions, or, you know, I'm happy to take feedback. I'm really wanting to know what's happening to you right now. What have you tried? What is not, you know, what have you tried that worked, not worked, whatever, and what would you like to hear more about from somebody like me? All right, thank you.
Thanks, Anna. And thank you, Cheryl. That's amazing information. If people want to unmute and ask questions, they can go for it, and I can start running through the chat as well. So I'll start from the bottom, I guess, with the topic matter. Are cutworms only actively feeding at night, and do you have to spray at night?
My understanding is that the vast majority are feeding at night. I've done a little bit of scouting myself. I don't have as much information as somebody who's doing it. So, you know, typically we'll go out right after dark, and we're finding them starting to move up and feed. If you have to spray at night, I mean, you could probably spray it late in the day, and whatever material that you're using would be active for a period of time. Again, like, we're in a tunnel, so those materials are not going to be as affected by UV desiccation, right? So I don't think you need to spray at night, unless, of course, you're using a material that has to get on the caterpillar. So I would not recommend a soap, or a safer soap or salt, or anything that has to get on the body of the caterpillar. But anything that needs to be consumed, that should be fine. Do you think that answers the question, Becky?
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, I know that, like, you and I had talked about BT and the timing of spraying, and also the coverage. I think once you have a pretty full set of greens, like that, those pictures of the chard you showed. I think it's really, I found a lot of them on the undersides of leaves. So I think that was kind of personally a trick that I couldn't figure out.
Yeah, and again, like the quick and dirty data I'm showing you, we are confining them with a cornmeal bait. So I'm finding efficacy with that, but I'm unclear on whether or not a sprayed application, like if they're consuming enough to stop that. So I mean, some of the people I've spoken to who have tried Entrust were very happy with Entrust, but like that's a big gun. And most of the people who had tried BT were not happy with what they found. It did something, it's not nothing, but it didn't really control it. Another thing that we have noticed is that folks that do use BT for cutworms are more likely to find caterpillars in the wash water. So they're more likely to be sick and not go back into the ground during the day. So that was something like, it's really satisfying to see some sick caterpillars, to know that your BT is working, but it's also like, it ends up being a crop contaminant too. So does that make sense? Does that jive with what other people are seeing?
I think so. Someone did comment that Entrust was effective in their experience. On another note, are there appropriate nematodes for cucumber beetles?
In talking to a couple of the suppliers that I've been talking to about entomopathogenic nematodes, is that again, you're in that same situation where if you can get that nematode to your target, and the larvae of the cucumber beetle, that the susceptible form for entomopathogenic nematodes, if you can get them down there, they do kill cucumber beetle larvae. So great. But if you think about cucumber beetles as a problem, your problem might be that they're coming in from your neighbors, they're coming in from somewhere else. So depending on what your goals are, entomopathogenic nematodes could be an important tool, but they would be something that you would do as kind of like over a period of time, or as an area-wide approach. They would probably not have efficacy on the adults. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great. Good answer. Another question that I think is a good one is whether or not having open soil in the high tunnel or covered with plastic is best.
That's a good question. I mean, you look at some biocontrol agents like aphids that need to get down to the soil in order to pupate. It could have some effect on that, but without having that sort of data to kind of back that up to see the effects, it's really hard to know. But, of course, covering your soil is also going to help, reduce your fungal diseases and other diseases from anything that might splash up from the soil. So, I mean, that's a tough one. What do you think, Anna?
What's funny? I'm stuck on winter stuff. So I was gonna say, well, in general, we go bare soil during the winter time. But as far as like the beneficials that are living in your soil naturally, part of this experiment that we're doing in the big collaboration is looking at the role of spiders. Right. And this is something that is brand new to me. It's kind of embarrassing. I don't really know anything about spiders, so I'm learning a lot about it. So, I mean, I guess, anything that you can do to encourage good habitat is something to consider, but it's like, if balancing things out. For that, I would say whatever's best for your plants, like you can find positives or negatives for either way. When it comes to biocontrol, it really depends on what your key species, your key pest species are, and what's driving the ship as far as crop production. Does that help? It's kind of vague.
This is
Yeah,
Suzanne.
and I mean, I think like sorry, go ahead, Suzanne.
Sorry, I was just saying that does help. We are brand new to high tunnel. We're not even don't even have ours built yet. And we are actually in Tennessee. So I know you guys are up north and have different climates, but we've kind of gotten mixed opinions on if we should cover everything with plastic and plant through the plastic, or the latest has been plant the plants in kind of a raised bed into the dirt, but leave it soil, but cover the rows with plastic. So we're just going to kind of have to play with it, I guess.
Yeah, and I think like managing heat, moisture, there's all these other like rodents I know they love landscape fabric. Like one of your recommendations, Cheryl, was to eliminate the weeds and use landscape fabric, but that's been like a huge rodent attractant on our farm. So it's just like, I guess we're always going to have problems. It's picking which ones we want to have. But another question is about fungal gnats and if we should be worrying. I actually just noticed a lot today. Are they concerned?
Fungus gnats kind of come with a territory this kind of year, and fungus gnats, their populations are in response to moisture. So if you have a lot of moisture or standing water or algae growth, that's what kind of perpetuates their population. So over time and during the summer, when things dry out, those tend to fade, those tend to fizzle out. But that just kind of comes with the territory during these damp, dark, cooler times of year.
I would agree with that. And I would also say maybe it's more of an indicator of soil quality, right? So if you're seeing that over and over again, I would be more worried about crops that are really sensitive to wet feet. So the fungus gnats don't matter at all, but they might be like a harbinger of problems to come. So that might be a reason to start thinking about, raising things up or adding more organic matter. But again, like the health of the plant comes first and foremost.
This is kind of a big question, but just can you touch on coverage, different sprayers? So the question is, when you say coverage is critical, please speak to methods when using a backpack sprayer or other techniques.
I think when you're using a backpack sprayer and thinking about coverage, if you're trying to decide whether or not to use one product over another, a lot of the crops that have nice open canopies are going to be good candidates for that Bavaria product. But once you have more mature plants, I would say don't use Bavaria. I think that's like anytime you have a situation where you have to coat the insect in anything, it really has to do with the situation. I know that there is a little bit of heat coming around ultra low volume application, foggers, things like that. That counterintuitively, it doesn't give you better coverage than a spray application, depending on the scenario. So I've been talking a lot with folks at DRAM about their foggers, where it seems really attractive to be able to kind of set something and forget it. And set up a machine to fog that tunnel and walk away. But again, like once plants get really mature, you might run into problems with coverage when it comes to foggers versus actually physically spraying something on a leaf surface and getting in there and making sure that you get it. So I'm sorry to say that it's kind of a situation-based thing. And of course, we're super limited when it comes to things that can go into tunnels. So does that help?
That's great. And I know there's been some past listserv questions about favorite backpack sprayers. So Karen, I can send you the link to search the archives, but a lot of great grower information on that.
I mean, I will say investing in battery assisted, CO2 assisted equipment is really helpful. And there's some cheap products out there too. If you're not sure if you want to invest in something bigger, once you get a battery assisted backpack sprayer, you might not want to go back.
I just kind of wanted to reiterate something about coverage, especially using the entomopathogens, because for the fungi, they have to contact the cuticle in order for the spore to germinate to cause infection. So if there's not a pest there, it's not going to work, right? So I just kind of wanted to reiterate that that's their mode of action. So it's really important for those biopesticides.
Another, I guess, comment more than anything, but Greg is saying that he's seeing decent populations of overwintering predatory mites, mainly seeing lots of aphid mummies on some indicator plants, hoping this is a good sign as the predators are here early and we haven't bought in any. I guess that's an important thing to address, like, removing crops, having that like bare tunnel versus trying to provide some overwintering habitat, like with a banker plant system or something like that.
I don't know. Like There's always going to be a little bit of nature. So things that we are seeing in our tunnels right now, on our research facilities, we do have low level aphids. I think anybody who has tunnels is going to have aphids no matter what. I'm having a really hard time telling what is just low levels and what's like a concerning number. I think if you talk to like any one of these people in this room right now, we're going to have a different idea of what's a concerning number. I do see periodically naturally occurring epizootics of fungal pathogens. So like seeing kind of sick aphids and like white covered aphids. And so like that's kind of nature taking its course. We definitely see parasitized aphids, low numbers of wasps that will overwinter with those aphid populations. But I would say that they probably are affected maybe 10% at the most of those aphids. So, you're seeing those and it might be something that keeps it at a steady boil. You're not going to eliminate aphids using naturally occurring biocontrols. Bringing in augmentation biocontrol, which is what Cheryl has really done a good job of laying out as all your options for augmentation. You're going to get more like to like 95, 99% control using more than that. I know a lot of people have found success with encouraging more habitat or encouraging more natural enemies to come in, but again, like that's not going to be 100% of your control. You're still going to have to balance other things. Cheryl, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I do definitely agree with that. And the thing with the wasps, to identify those, you got to get down to the molecular level, because to ID them based off morphology is really tricky. So it's really hard for us to even know what species they are unless you collect them all and send them to a real specialist that can really, PCR them out to see what they are and catalog them. So there's a lot of naturally occurring natural enemies out there that we haven't even really harnessed their true potential. And we're starting to be more aware of those and kind of surveying for them more to see which ones could be future, biocontrol agents for mass releases. Would you agree with that too, Anna?
Yeah. And there's no right answer, right?
No.
So it's more situational. So, like you might have, if you're looking at like the ebb and flow of natural predators coming in, like I would say like the predatory flies are like the cavalry showing up, right? So here we are this time of year trying to augment our natural populations of biocontrols in our tunnels. And as soon as those sides come up and hoverfly larvae come in, like forget about it, aphids are dunzo bunzo, if you can get hoverflies to come into your tunnels. So I think some of these broad spectrum predatory flies like Aphidoletes are really aggressive, but they're not appropriate for all times of year, and they might not be appropriate for tunnels in the summertime because it's too hot, right? Mm-hmm. So we're working with really extreme environments, and depending on what that environment is and depending on what your situation is, one thing will be better than another. So
there was a question about that earlier, and it was about using pirate bugs for thrips and aphids. And there's a reason why they weren't being used in the winter. And, the reason why is because they undergo diapause in the fall in response to day length. So they're just not really effective in that time of year. So, it's not something you want to commercially purchase and try to use in the dead of winter, because it's just kind of, you're just throwing your money away. But, you look at these other situations, a lot of, people are starting to heat their tunnels. So this just kind of muddies the water with pest control, because now they're being heated. So now you're perpetuating possible aphid issues and making conditions that are more conducive for releases for biocontrols at an earlier time. And, it's just, we just don't really have the best handle on what, we don't have a cookbook approach about what to use for every specific situation. So, we're getting more of an understanding of that. And it's just hard to say with so many different situations, and everyone's different, and what works for one grower is not going to work for another. So it's just finding the balance that works for you, and scout and make sure that those pests don't get to those levels that you can't manage effectively or easily.
And I will say, definitely talk to your suppliers. Like, this is a situation where, like, I think that the suppliers know what's up. I mean, they will be, I will say they'll be a little bit more careful about giving you a product in less than optimal conditions. They don't want to give you something that's going to fail or not perform the way that they expect. So, you know, Carol's not going to let you do this unless she feels really confident it's going to work. I might push the boundaries a little bit to be like, yeah, sure, put lace wings in there in the wintertime. But rely on your supplier's information. Not only do they know what's appropriate for you, they know it's available at that given time, because there might be supply chain issues depending on who's rearing what. I mean, again, like, we in the Northeast are a little bit limited to what's local. Usually things are coming from different parts of the country, and we definitely don't have the same resources that they do in Europe. So trust your supplier.
One last question here. There's a question about how many sticky cards per 1,000 square foot tunnel. And I mean, I believe it's still 1 per 1,000 square foot or feet is what people are still using, but it depends on your budget, because they're expensive. So more, more isn't going to hurt if you have the time to look at them. But the thing about blue versus yellow sticky cards, blue has been used. They say that it works better in lower light for thrips, but yellow still is the one that's used quite frequently for a lot of these greenhouse and high tunnel pests. So I think, it's still 1 o'clock. We still taking Anne's questions, or?
I think we should wrap up. If people want to stick around, we can, but you guys are a dynamic duo, such great resources. Thank you so much. And I assume it's okay for folks to contact either of you with follow-up questions, if that's okay. Maybe pop your, Anna, at least, could you pop your email in the chat?
Sure.
I'm sure Cheryl's easy to find for Vermont folks, but thank you both so much. Yeah, go ahead, Cheryl.
Anna's email is also on the beginning of my PowerPoint with a high tunnel team for New Hampshire and Vermont. So.
And we'll post the slides and the recording in a couple days. So thank you both so much. Great information.
Yeah, this was fun. Thank you so much.
A lot of pests to look forward to this coming growing season.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.